So here's a short video I want to share with you about what we're doing at Veridian.
Hi, I'm Matt Grokoff, the founding partner of the Thrive Collaborative. It's our mission to accelerate the transformation to a truly sustainable human-built environment that is nature-rich and ecologically restorative.
We're planning Veridian adjacent to County Farm Park, nestled between 130 acres of woods, wildflower-lined trails, community gardens, and playgrounds. We're targeting it to be one of the nation's first mixed-income net zero energy communities. And we're creating one of the world's first Living Community Challenge master plans, often called the most rigorous and inspiring green building standard. Veridian at County Farm is expected to be a 100% all-electric development powered by solar, with no gas lines or combustion appliances of any kind. Front porches facing greenways are planned to connect you into miles of wooded trails. Our landscaping is viewed as a means of reviving ecosystems, and 30% is dedicated for food production like edible plant gardens and streets lined with fruit trees. And plans for your neighborhood include a multi-purpose community barn, a greenhouse, and a farmhouse with a full-service farm-stop grocery where you can buy local food from local farmers year-round. To make bike ownership easy, we plan a 4-season bike maintenance and repair shed. Ann Arbor has been called the best place to live in America. Veridian is located near downtown Ann Arbor, the University of Michigan, and world-class research hospitals. It's just steps away from the Mary Lou Murray Recreation Center and a short walk to a farmer's market, organic groceries, dozens of restaurants, shops, bookstores, and conveniences. Using human-scale design, plans for the site include a variety of market-rate housing types and 50 units of affordable housing through our collaboration with a local nonprofit supportive housing provider. The land had been owned by Washtenaw County since 1836 and was used for over a century as the county poor farm. In the 1960s, they built a youth prison, which was later abandoned and then demolished. In 2018, Washtenaw County unanimously approved the sale of the property for the development of Veridian at County Farm.
We will not be defined by the unsparing consequences of climate change, but by how we respond as the window for opportunity for action closes. Now is a time to invest in the positive solutions demanded by climate crisis. Now is a time for a world of living communities.
Visit veridian@countyfarm.com to learn more about investing in this extraordinary neighborhood or purchasing a home of your own. So that's a little bit of what we're trying to do. The way that this is possible is through these incredible collaborations. So we're really collaborating with folks dealing with water infrastructure, with independent living, mobility, bike share programs, car share programs, barn preservation, the parks next door, and really connecting, education programs, affordable housing. All of these partnerships in a really, really collaborative way, and trying to hack each one of these major issues. So coming up in the next few months, we're going to have a food hack about how do we integrate food into the built environment and get food production optimized as much as possible where we live. We'll be talking about equity. How do you create social equity with food and energy and sociality and economics, all of these things inside of a neighborhood, and materials as well. Where are we buying our materials? What kind of labor are we using to process those materials? And really trying to come up with some creative ideas that we're going to get from people in the community. And so this is an early concept drawing of Veridian at County Farm. Just recently, because of the work that we're doing, the United Nations is actually going to be honoring us next month, along with about 41 other projects from around the world, at the UN Habitat Conference in Abu Dhabi. The Earth Institute at Columbia University partnered with them to start in accelerating the Sustainable Development Goals program, because frankly, every nation on Earth is failing. Nobody is achieving these targets. So they're trying to find projects around the world that exemplify what does good look like? How are we going to get there? And they selected our project as one of those projects, saying it's actually quite simple and beautiful when you look at it. This is what it looks like. And again, their goal is, like I said in the beginning, pretty simple. Just showing what a world that doesn't suck, what that looks like, and showing that inspiring vision. And the platform that we're using to design this neighborhood is the Living Community Challenge. And for those familiar with the Living Building Challenge, the Living Community Challenge is an extension of that, saying, what does a community of living buildings look like? And so we are targeting net zero energy for the neighborhood wide for the Thrive parcel. And like the Living Building Challenge, the Living Community Challenge uses the metaphor of the forest. How can we create a community that operates as elegantly as a forested ecosystem? So the forest, or a flower, or a tree, as should our buildings, are unique to place, right? We can't have this argument about which is better at harvesting water. Is it a saguaro cactus, or is it a bur oak tree? And the answer is, it depends. And we don't really say that for our buildings. We build the same kind of building in Arizona that we do here in Michigan very often. We have buildings that should be adapted to their climate and their site, the way a forested ecosystem. A tree, a flower, a forest harvests 100% of its own energy and 100% of its own water. A tree can't uproot itself and move to the other side of the street to get more water. It has to be adapted to its site and be able to harvest those things where it stands. And for true sustainability, the laws of physics basically say that our buildings need to do this as well. And the way to do it is really at the community scale. Trees help each other harvest water and get nutrients and everything else and behave symbiotically. And that goes to this notion of promoting well-being, that each organism is actually helping the other organisms around it, as our buildings should be. You can imagine buildings harvesting and sharing resources like water, energy, and food. And they're part of integrated systems, right? Nothing acts alone. Like I said earlier, all of life depends on these underlying networks. And mathematically, actually a professor here at the University of Michigan came up with a mathematical proof that showed whether in physical, biological, or human organizational systems, diversity is key to establishing complex adaptive ecosystems. Without diversity, you get oversimplification, you get linearity. Both of those things are a symptom of weakness and ultimate decline and disease, and eventual collapse. Diversity is essential. And we kind of know this intuitively, that beauty is a big part of this. It's not a design element, but a result. So when you go to the most virgin forests in the world, the ones that are most remote and most untouched, without a landscape architect, they are some of the most beautiful areas of the world. And our buildings should be too. We shouldn't be designing giant thermos-like buildings that operate with perfect efficiency but are not beautiful. Without beauty, we cannot have sustainability. It is a precondition. So the Living Community Challenge mimics the same performance standards that the Living Building Challenge does. So place, materials, water, equity, energy, beauty, health, and happiness are all considered petals. And under each one of those petals, there's different imperatives. So at Veridian, we'll be achieving the place petal, which is limits to growth, urban agriculture, habitat exchange. The limits to growth is basically saying that we should not be building on green fields. There's enough of the planet that is already developed for the current human population, and more than double the existing human population to survive on if we build sustainably. This is the site of the old county farm, the Poor Farm for Washtenaw County, which was built in 1836. And eventually in the 1960s, youth prison was built on the site and operated there until 2011, and then it was ultimately demolished, and then we were able to purchase the land. The other component of place is urban agriculture. So we're going to be deeply integrating food production into the design of our landscaping. So we will have some formal garden plots, but we'll also have streets lined with fruit trees and a real integrated food system, including grocery stores and things like that. This is just an example of something that doesn't really pay attention to site. This was a proposal for the same site that was rejected by the county when they were selling land. And what you've got here is far less green space, the exact number of trees that the city would require. So they've kind of checked the box off on that silo, but you can see this giant detention pond down at the end of the property that is not only ugly, but it's not restorative and frankly not really resilient. This is the same part of the property in one of our early design drawings. Actually, this is one of the more recent design drawings. It's very similar to this now. That shows living spaces, community spaces, native landscaping, adaptive species, rainwater, all integrated into the same design. And for our food systems, this is the commercial space that we're going to have, which is modeled after Argus Farm Stop here in Ann Arbor, which is a 7-day-a-week, year-round farmers market in a grocery store setting, where the farmer gets 75 cents on the sale of the produce, but they don't have to be there to sell their produce like they do at a farmer's market. And for the consumer, it's just this beautiful small market where you can get everything you need, from meats and cheeses to different oils and sugars and milk, dairy, produce year round, all from local farmers and producers within the region. This is a picture that I have in there just because this is a formal garden in the United Kingdom, and I'm hoping that this is what our formal gardens are going to look like. The other element is habitat exchange. That yes, we do need to only build on existing gray or brownfield spaces. We should not be building on greenfield. But in that time, imagine if every developer were required to set aside money to purchase the equal amount of land, every new development that we build on an existing piece of property, if we were to take that amount of land and preserve land in perpetuity somewhere else. So at Veridian, we're going to be making a contribution to one of the local Washtenaw County land trusts and setting aside 9 acres of land, the equivalent of land that we'll be developing, in perpetuity, forever. It will be buying, the land trust will be buying the development rights of sensitive, ecologically sensitive land that is threatened for being developed and should be preserved. We're really deeply looking into human-powered living in part of that space. So we're doing a bike maintenance and repair shed. We'll have EV bike sharing and cargo bike sharing and cargo trailer sharing, so you can have a standard bike and not have to worry about buying an expensive cargo bike or trailer. We'll have EV car sharing to really minimize or even eliminate the number of cars that you might need. We'll have layered sociality, so front porches that are facing greenways, and that combined with our water and our ecosystem services. And so landscaping is really meant to revive these ecosystems. And again, 30% of that landscaping will be dedicated to food production, whether that's through conventional food and small hoops with kale and collards growing, all the way to pawpaw trees and hazelnuts and elderberry and other kinds of native species that are food producing, with a really deep plan about how we farm and produce and harvest all of that and then distribute it to the public. And then energy in the Living Building Challenge and the Living Community Challenge is very straightforward, and it's completely performance-based. It's as simple as it is for a tree. It's required to harvest all of the energy that it needs over the course of a year on site without combustion of any kind. No gas lines are allowed, 100% electric. And that's a pretty simple and straightforward thing that we can do in these early design stages. We have committed to the county to develop at least 400 kW. Our internal goals are actually to have more than double that, and then power our transportation as well, and have a local energy microgrid that we would partner with the utility company to do to make that renewable energy grid beneficial. And we'll have to do another talk sometime next year about how that works and what that means to be grid beneficial. This was the original gas line that came into our house. When DTE came out to disconnect it, they were driving away when I ran outside and saw them and said, "Hey, you left the meter there." He said, "Oh yeah, we turned it off." And I said, "No, I want you to take away the meter." They said, "Well, we leave it there for when you want to turn it back on again." I said, "I never want to turn it back on again." And for the first time in his 25-year career at DTE, he walked away with an old meter without replacing it. And there are more and more of these emerging around Ann Arbor. I keep getting emails almost on a weekly basis of people looking for praise that, hey, we have decarbonized the house, we've taken away our gas line, and we'll be putting up solar very, very soon. We're talking with a number of different vendors, but Tesla is the sexiest among them, about possibly doing all of the roofs with no matter which direction they're facing with these solar roof shingles. Oddly enough, it would the cost so far is pretty comparable to doing an entire metal roof and one side of it being solar. But in this scenario, we could actually harvest more energy, even though each individual shingle is less efficient per square foot than a conventional solar panel would be. So like a tree that has leaves all around it, even on the north side, even on the bottom, even on the most densely shaded part of the tree, you still have leaves that are achieving some level of photosynthesis. And overall, you're optimizing rather than trying to maximize your output. So we will actually be able to harvest more energy using a solar roof shingle all over the roof than we would by having solar panels just on one side of the roofs. So we're hoping that that's going to work out. And this is the biggest threat that we have right now. It's a real thing. You can look this up. It's POCBS. It's power outages caused by squirrels. I swear it's true. Google it. You'll have fun looking at all the stories virtually weekly nationwide about the havoc that squirrels wreak on our existing very poor infrastructure in the United States. This is much less of a problem in the European grid, but this is something that we're up against, and we need to really rethink our grid. And so solar and storage is part of that. So by having a microgrid, the utility company could actually have a neighborhood that helps balance their moment-to-moment and daily load cycling. So you can imagine on a July day where the grid is overloaded, they can't produce enough power, they've got everybody coming home at 5 o'clock, turning on their air conditioners, and at the hottest time of the day. In the meantime, you've got a neighborhood that at 12 o'clock was producing tons of solar that the utility company couldn't use. So the utility company then could have control over that software, try to get that neighborhood to use whatever energy it can earlier in the day. So run those dryers and everything else earlier in the day, store the energy that you're using from the solar panels, and then at 5 o'clock, when you need that extra energy, shut off some of the energy use from that neighborhood, reduce the demand load, and then begin to draw some of those electrons from the solar panels live and from the battery packs that are in that. So there's this really dynamic energy pool that it can rely on in a millisecond, as opposed to 20 minutes that it might take to ramp up or down a typical coal-powered or nuclear-powered power plant. And water, while Veridian will not be seeking the water pedal, because right now code just doesn't allow for potable water systems, we will be demonstrating how that can work on the site, and we'll really be considering rainwater as an asset. We won't have any sewer pipes in the conventional sense. All of those green areas are all areas that are spots that will be harvesting rainwater and putting it back into the aquifer. Health and happiness is a really big part of this, really looking at how do we take, just like in nature and natural systems, where you have these synergistic purposes for elements, where alleys and streets and parks and walls and rooftops all have multiple purposes, rather than be just ugly part of infrastructures that become really, really beneficial to the community. So you have this synergistic infrastructure that has multiple purposes. So that pathway, sure, that's for a bicycle or for a pedestrian, but it's also a bioswale. It's also putting water back into the plants and structures around it. It's also reviving ecosystems through its native plants and providing food for the community through conventional apple trees that you see there on the left. And then again, having these ecosystems that become just a beautiful part of the center of the community. And then materials as well. So we're going to be trying to avoid the 14 or so chemicals that are on the materials red list that are the worst in class materials, these forever chemicals that are bioaccumulative and toxic and persistent. And they break down into a larger class of about 777 different chemicals. So this is what makes it so damn hard. And we're, as far as waste goes, we're looking at doing, instead of having a trash plan, we're actually submitting to the city of Ann Arbor with our site plan a living materials plan. So really zoning where materials are coming from and classifying how many people live in there, not units, but how many people, and how can we estimate how much waste product is coming out of their house, and can we divide that waste in a beneficial way? So separating things like boxes from the recycling so that they're not filling up the recycling bins, having carts rather than dumpsters, having them easily accessible, and making the easiest access to things that are the most beneficial, which would be composting, and then making composting mandatory for all of the residents of Veridian through our HOA rules. And cross-contamination is already regulated through the city. You can't be putting trash inside of your compost bin. So both the city and the HOA would have regulatory authority, and basically just not wanting to get on the bad side of all your neighbors who all have been educated since day one about these material conservation plans for the entire neighborhood and then individually in their own home. And this might be what a materials kiosk looks like rather than a conventional dumpster. And then materials themselves, we'll try to use as much salvage material throughout the projects as we can. We'll have a community barn that will be used as a community center and an indoor weekly farmers market. And we're saving a barn from the 1840s that has a unique architectural structure on the inside. There's only 2 barns in Michigan that have this particular kind of structure. And we're going to be working with the Barn Preservation Society to disassemble this, ship it down to Ohio, restore the parts of it, and bring it back to the site and re-engineer it, reassemble it, possibly using draft horses and a conventional barn raising. And then, of course, equity as a precondition to sustainability as well. So really looking at humane scale, really layered social spaces, adaptable and accessible design. We'll have elevators. We won't have any single-story buildings because single-story really doesn't jive with density. So with that verticality, we take into account the potential changing needs of every inhabitant, and units will have these stacked closets that are dimensioned to fit a retrofit elevator at a later date if that homeowner ever needs it. And so for a cost of $20,000 rather than $100,000 plus to retrofit a typical existing home, typically what would happen is that the homeowner would have to move if they experienced a disability. In this case, we build that adaptability into it. And then nature play spaces throughout and things like that. And then again, really looking at beauty. So what we choose to build now is going to define us for the next 1,000 years. And we've really got about 18 months to commit to this transition. And so by the time that Veridian is completed, 2.5, 3 years from now, all neighborhoods are going to start having to be built like this. And by 2030, we really better have all developments built like this. And so one of the things we need to shift is this financial model. So if y'all saw this past week, the very conservative CEO of BlackRock Financial, a very conservative investment organization that invests other people's money in about 40 or 50 countries around the world, with trillions of dollars of assets, sent a letter to CEOs saying that BlackRock was going to begin decarbonizing their portfolio because of the risk that climate change poses to the financial model. So for sustainable projects like this, we still need to work within the conventional model, but we want to demonstrate examples of how projects can raise money locally and through like-minded folks around the country and around the world that are interested in investing in that kind of project. So we've set aside a maximum of $500,000 of our total equity raise for the development, with a minimum investment of only $500. And we're using the local stake platform. So I encourage everyone, we've got a goal of hitting the $150,000 mark by next week. And likely we'll be hitting about $200,000 from some of the folks that have indicated they're going to be investing soon. You can go to that website. You can go to our website, Veridian@countyfarm.com, and that'll give you a link to the local stake site to really show how that works. And you can imagine if municipalities mandated something like this. I don't know how it would work, but we can do that thought experiment. What if a company from Chicago that was developing something in Grand Rapids or in Ann Arbor or anywhere else in the country that never visited those cities, and the people who have their money invested in that project don't even necessarily know about what the project is? But what if they had to get a portion of their equity raise from people in the community that it was being built? You can imagine that we would have very different types of buildings and developments being built. If you had to get the buy-in from people, not just saying, yes, I'm not going to scream and yell at the city council meeting to oppose you, but I am also going to invest my finances in your project because I believe in it and it's a kind of development I want in my neighborhood. And that's what we're seeing here with Veridian at County Farm. We've had over 1,000 signatures of support from people in the community, and now people are starting to invest with their dollars. And just this past week, we actually opened it up. You're allowed to invest from your IRA. So you can open up a self-directed IRA, move money out of a fossil fuel fund and into Veridian during the course of the project, and then put that money back into the IRA through with all the same tax benefits and everything else that an IRA has. So it's a pretty neat way to start a fossil fuel free portfolio. So I'll close with on these notes that back to the beginning, we know that every living system on Earth is in decline. We're oversimplifying the planet in our engineering. And this last spring in March, I had the privilege of being in Stockholm, Sweden, and on the night that I was going to meet Greta Thunberg, I woke up that morning with a text from my wife that my daughter was crying for 30 minutes in the basement because there were tornadoes blasting outside of our home here in Ann Arbor on some of the last days of winter. We're experiencing tornado warnings while I'm going to the first global climate strike to meet this wonderful woman and the other 10 students who were striking with her since that previous August. And got to hang out with some of their parents. And that's a banner that my daughter and some of her classmates made at her school that we brought to Greta. It was an extraordinary, very Forrest Gump-like experience for me to be in this space. And so again, this is the number that we're likely to blow past. Just our existing infrastructure alone is going to blow us past this number. And in the meantime, we continue to approve new buildings that have gas in them. So that this crisis only gets worse with our conventional path. And to put this into perspective, by 2030, my oldest daughter is going to be 21 years old. If she's lucky enough to live to 100 years old, she'll still be alive in the year 2114. So when we think about these futuristic dates that the United Nations talks about, these are not the storms of some distant generation. These are the storms of our children. They're our storms. There are people around the world right now experiencing the impacts of climate crisis. And I've personally, in my travels, sadly been able to meet many climate refugees, including architects and lawyers from Puerto Rico and the Bahamas and Houston, Texas, people losing their homes. But the good news is that trend is not destiny, right? This is what our kids do. They switch clothes, they grow up fast. That's our house. We took that house on the left and we made it a net zero house there. This is the Bullitt Center in Seattle. It harvests 125% of all of its own energy. It's about the size of the Ann Arbor City Hall building, which is a LEED certified building, but still an energy hog, whereas the Bullitt Center is a Class A triple net leased office building that harvests all the energy it needs on site with all electric, no combustion whatsoever. It goes edge to edge in an urban setting. It harvests 100% of the water that it needs on site, treats it to potable standards, reuses the gray water in the building, and then all of the used water gets distributed and put back into those plantings, into that park right next door, and through underground pumps that go into the ground and back into the aquifer. So the water that falls from the sky that gets used in the building in the same way it does in a tree either gets transpired back up into the atmosphere or goes back into the aquifer exactly where it would have flowed to pre-development. And then there's no sewer pipe connected to this building. All of the waste is managed in the basement through high-tech composting systems, again, in a beautiful luxury office building. And everything that leaves that building is a nutrient, not a waste product. This is the yoga studio at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York. Again, a cold climate place. And again, you know, synergistic purposes. This was not a building that was designed as their yoga studio. It's just so freaking beautiful. They use it as their yoga studio, but its primary purpose is its sewage treatment plant. This is a living machine. That's Skip Bacchus, the CEO of the Omega Institute, showing off some of the tropical plants that are growing inside of this building from the wastewater that's coming from the toilets all over the Omega Institute campus. And I'll leave you with this, and then we'll get into some quick Q&A. This is from my favorite authors, Wendell Berry, The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and what my children's lives may be, I go and I lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron. I come into peace of the wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting for their light. And for a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. And to me, when I met those students in Sweden, they were the day-blind stars. They're glowing for us in broad daylight, whether or not we see their light. And I think the world is awakening to the beauty of their stardom right now. But we have to act. So Brett, I mean, I'd like to start with the question out to everyone else is if there's anything that people were expecting to learn from this or hear from me that they didn't hear, I'd like to hear that first. It was something you were expecting to hear but didn't, that we could talk about now.
Thanks for watching. Please continue to watch the next part of the session to complete the course and get your continuing education credits. Be sure to check out all of our courses available online that you can watch anytime and anywhere to pick up your CEUs. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube to get weekly updates and stay up to date on green building science courses, webinars, and home tours. Thanks again.